Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to my channel. My name is Paul, the Canadian Snowman, here once again with another awesome video. We're doing the rise and fall of Sparta. Sparta, pretty cool stuff. What I know about Sparta, I know the movie, and this, since Sparta was mentioned here or there through videos I've done, but I don't know who and what exactly is Sparta. It's probably like area in Greece, right? But like, I guess how'd they come to be, how'd they fall, and all that stuff, and just exactly like the details of them, I have no clue. So yeah, mostly what I know is from like the few mentions I've heard, like I said, and then the movie, the big wall and whatnot. But anyways, guys, let's get into it. Please hit that like and subscribe below. And yeah, and what channel is this from? We were doing it for Invicta. I've done a couple of videos for Invicta. Pretty cool stuff, Figured I'd because I've seen Sparta was mentioned when I was scrolling through on a different channel, and I wanted either like what is Sparta? I didn't want like just to follow Sparta. I didn't want just like how did Sparta fight. I wanted to actually get to know Sparta, and I Googled, and this was one of the few that popped up that one of the only ones that popped up that had the rise and fall, and that wasn't like an hour long. So this is the one we're doing today. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Like I said, like and subscribe, and let's jump into it.
The glory of Sparta reigns supreme in our minds. Yet, were you to attempt to visit today, you would be sorely disappointed. Rather than the proud remains of a once all-powerful city-state, tourists will find but a few scattered ruins.
Really?
But what if you could travel back in time and visit the living, breathing world of...
So Sparta isn't like Rome and Greece. I mean, they said there was some like little remnants of it, but like Greece and Rome, like you could still see like almost like full buildings and see like a lot of history. I've never been, but just like I guess from the videos I've seen and stuff like that. And so I guess this is not. You'd be really disappointed, I guess, if you're expecting the same kind of showing that you'd see in Rome and Greece. That's what they're saying. Well, I guess that's good to know.
Ancient Sparta. But what if you could travel back in time and visit the living, breathing world of ancient Sparta? Well, it turns out you didn't have to go that far back, as this was actually something that occurred in the past. Hundreds of years after Sparta's golden age, tourists from across the Mediterranean, including Emperor Augustus himself, flocked to see the fabled city. Today, let us explore the rise and fall of Sparta, from ancient superpower to tourist attraction.
Yeah. Hold on a second.
I've slowly been accumulating...
Second. I just like, this ages here. The Bronze Age, Dark Age, Archaic Age, Classical Age. Oh, okay. Interesting.
To tourist attraction. I've slowly been accumulating quite the library of history books to make these documentaries. However, as my shelves start to overflow, I found it hard to absorb all the information I've accumulated so far.
See, I think books are like, I don't read at all. Like, to be honest, I might have finished like a handful of books in my life from like front to back. I know, but I just want to collect books just to have keepsakes, just to have them. I don't know, because I always think it's really cool when I see people with all these cool books. I don't know, like I could never read like a whole book, but I don't know, just if I wanted to find something, it'd be kind of cool just to be able to pick a book up. And like, I don't know, find something in the page without using the Google. I don't know why I stopped it for that, but anyways.
So far, let alone explore other titles on my reading list. I'm sure in your own busy life, it can be tough to do all the reading you'd like to. Thankfully, our sponsor Blinkist has a goal. As an example, I've recently been able to brush up on the late Roman Empire off a full membership. Enjoy.
Okay.
The ancient tourism we will be discussing took place in the Roman era, many centuries after the rise and fall of Sparta. We could start there, but as with any good tour, I think it will be appropriate to cover the backstory first.
Okay.
So here we go. Sparta's origins stretch back to the early Bronze Age. However, during this time, it would be a pretty glacial era of development, with Sparta really only beginning its rise to power at the start of the Archaic period. This occurred locally.
I guess like the collapse of the Bronze period and the collapse of I'm surprised that I am not surprised that Sparta was very small, so I guess that's why it wasn't mentioned. Never mind.
Sparta really only beginning its rise to power at the start of the Archaic period. This occurred locally at first, as several villages coalesced into a loose urban center that would have many similarities with the other developing city-states of the period. Over the 8th to 7th centuries BC, they used their collective might to dominate the area around them, first absorbing their immediate neighbors in Laconia and then in Messenia. In the ensuing 6th century BC, Sparta seems to have undergone a socio-political shakeup, which is traditionally attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus. However, modern scholarship proposes a more organic process that brought about a restructuring of the government and a more stark division between citizens and non-citizens, who were grouped together into the class of the Helots and the Perioikoi. The former were enslaved communities centered around Sparta and Messenia, who worked the lands and held virtually no rights, while the latter were free communities from the further flung areas of Spartan territory, who held limited rights. Thus reformed, Sparta was able to find the stability necessary to continue its expansion. This at first came in the form of outright conquest, but soon transitioned to a foreign policy involving a series of unequal alliances we call the Peloponnesian League. Its members had to swear to follow wherever the Spartans led. By the 5th century BC, the power of the League was so significant that it elevated Sparta as the primary leader of the Greek world. This presented them with a unique opportunity to achieve greatness during the Greco-Persian Wars. Sparta's well-deserved victories and ensuing propagandizing helped further elevate them to the status of superstars in the ancient world. Over the next few decades, they would go on to compete with Athens in the Peloponnesian War to see who would be the true master of Greece. Ultimately, Sparta came out the victors, thus marking the ultimate pinnacle.
That's right. That's like when they had the first Olympics, right? I remember doing a video on the first Olympics. So yeah, this sounds familiar. Cool. And yeah, they weren't allowed to go to war during the Olympics. Anyways.
Ultimately, Sparta came out the victors, thus marking the ultimate pinnacle of their rise. This last century would be the snapshot in time for which they would be remembered for all eternity. It's the moment all tourists would hope to catch a glimpse of when they visited the site of Sparta long after its glory days had faded. However, were you to actually travel back in time, most people would be quite unimpressed. Thucydides, for instance, muses on this idea when he writes, quote, "Suppose, for example, that the city of Sparta were to become deserted and that only the temples and foundations of buildings remained. I think that future generations would, as time passed, find it very difficult to believe that the place had really been as powerful as it was represented to be. Yet the Spartans occupy 2/5 of the Peloponnese and stand at the head not only of the whole Peloponnese itself, but also of numerous allies and frontiers. Since, however, the city is not regularly planned and contains no temples or monuments of great significance, but is simply a collection of villages, in the ancient Hellenic way, its appearance would not come up to expectation." The city, at this time, mostly featured mud brick or wood structures, with very little in the way of monumental architecture, or even a wall. Clearly, Sparta had other factors that contributed to its power. According to Plutarch, if you were to ask King Cleomenes about this, he would reply, quote, "Cities ought not to be fortified with stones and timbers, but with the strong virtues of their inhabitants." He might also add his famous.
So they didn't spend money on big statues and like coliseums, and I mean maybe they had one, but they didn't have these giant structures to where they were in awe of their people or their enemies or whatnot. They kind of, I guess, put their money in good use, like maybe into the army and stuff like that. But when their towns are like, okay, we're cool, like we don't need to live above our means, we'll just get what's necessary, live nice humble lives, but we don't need all the flashy glory stuff. I get it.
Quip that Sparta had no need for walls. Its armed citizens were its walls.
Yeah.
Yet unfortunately for him, the polis faced a crisis on this front. Around 500 BC, at the cusp of the Greco-Persian Wars, Sparta is estimated to have had a population of around 8,000 adult male citizens.
Wow.
However, by the time Sparta reigned as master of Greece, some 100 years later, its citizen population had cratered to just a few thousand as a result of wartime attrition, natural disaster, and wealth inequality, to name just a few factors. Thus, its hegemony was always tenuous at best, lasting but a pitiful 10 years before being brought down by other rising powers like Thebes. They were bested at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, and the following year saw Epaminondas invade the Peloponnese with an army of 35,000. In a series of crippling blows, many Spartan allies defected, the Messenian helots revolted, and the new city of Megalopolis was erected in Acadia as a check on their ambitions. Sparta's powers completely collapsed, even more suddenly than it had risen. Shortly thereafter, Philip of Macedon and his reformed army swooped in to take control of Greece, and didn't even bother subduing Sparta. During the ensuing period, the city would struggle for relevance and attempted to pull out of its nosedive. King Aegeus IV and Cleomenes III, for example, instituted a series of reforms meant to bring back the Sparta of old. This involved redistributing land, forgiving debts, expanding citizenship, reinstituting the agoge, and overall trying to make Sparta great again. This had some success, but ultimately saw the city beaten back by its neighbors.
Damn.
As a symbol of its true decline, Sparta was even driven to erect its first set of walls for protection. But even this was not enough to resist its spiraling situation. By the end of the 2nd century BC, Sparta was absorbed into the Achaean League, had its walls torn down, had the agoge banned, and was forced to style itself in the manner of its peers. For all intents and purposes, the Sparta of legend was dead.
Damn.
However,
Damn, it didn't seem like it lasted very long. The walls of the wall, like, I don't know, when I think of the walls, I guess I'm thinking about the movie, which I know it's a movie, so it's probably extremely inaccurate. You know how there's giant walls where, Greeks could not get in kind of thing, and then they have the Trojan horse, and they trick them. If you watch the movie, you know what I'm saying. But, yeah, I figured those big walls would have been like in their peak time period, But I guess not. Those walls were, when they were trying to get back to there, but never really did, and they just got swallowed up. It's kind of, I don't know. I feel kind of sad for it.
memories of its past would live on, and it is this fact that would actually revive the city in the Roman era.
Okay.
The Romans had initially rubbed shoulders with the Greeks as they expanded across Italy and Sicily.
Right.
Yet it was their wars against the successor kingdoms that really led them to dominate the Hellenic world. In these matters, Sparta stood to benefit from the change in management and actually sided with Rome in the final major Greek revolt against the invaders.
Oh, wow.
The decision proved prudent. When the uprising was crushed, Sparta was rewarded with the status of a free city and finally allowed to return to her old ways and customs, at least within the bounds of what the provincial Roman governors would tolerate. It's around this time that we see Sparta 2.0 begin its reboot.
2.0.
There was much to be done. For example, when the Roman general Lucius Aemilius Paulus stopped by Sparta to pay his respects, he found little that remained of their ancestral way of life beyond a peculiar clothing and hairstyle adopted by the men. The Lycurgan laws of old had long since withered away, and recent generations had little actual interaction with their revered past. Those few who did were the teachers and philosophers who had taught themselves about Spartan history. As should be expected, though, their understanding of the past was warped by legend and filtered through their own biases. The plans for a Spartan...
So they must not have not had like a whole lot of paperwork to go by, like if it was just from like legends, just from hearsay, I guess, being handed down kind of thing. I guess they didn't have a whole lot of history written down. I mean, obviously they had to have had it for us to know what we know. I mean, I guess what we know could have been through like Sparta's enemies or whatnot. But I don't know. I guess they have to take the word for those people. It's not like they have the internet to look this stuff up, right?
Warped by legend and filtered through their own biases.
Okay.
The plans for a Sparta 2.0 were thus in many ways a caricature of some imagined reality. Initially, Sparta was able to make some headway under a brief period of stable Roman rule. However, this was soon disrupted by the civil wars of the 1st century BC, which saw armies march across Greece, draining vast pools of manpower and supplies. Luckily for Sparta, they once again backed the winning horse in the form of Augustus. When the victorious general became emperor, he awarded the city special attentions, honoring it with a personal visit in 22 BC. As always with Augustus, though, the move had ulterior motives. He was attempting to stitch back together the fabric of a torn republic by presenting himself as a conservative ruler who would bring back the stability of the pre-war years. Associating himself with Sparta, The ultimate conservative symbol was exactly what he needed. There was, however, the small problem we mentioned, that Sparta had only just begun its reboot and didn't have much to show in the way of its supposed conservative chops. But that was something an emperor could certainly help with. Augustus came not just to visit, but to finance. During his trip, he acted the part of a wealthy tourist, observing the contests in the Agoge and dining in the common mess hall while spending heavily along the way. This set an incredible precedent that future emperors and other prominent elites would follow. Soon, a reciprocal relationship was formed, whereby outsiders flocked to sponsor activities in the city, while it, in return, provided a piece of the true Spartan experience. The truer the experience, the better. You can imagine how this would go. In essence, a tourist trap was formed.
Wow.
So what would this experience have been like? Well, admittedly, we don't know much for sure. Early on, tourists may have been there to just pop in and observe the daily activities. It seems a hostel actually existed that could hold guests that arrived.
I find it like it's fascinating that there's tourists. Obviously there was, but when I think of old time, I feel like people kind of just getting by and just doing what they got to survive. I don't really think about people. I guess just like we did a video on pilgrimages. I guess people just get tired where they're at and they're bored in their lives, and they probably just load their backpack or whatnot, and they just through all these rumors and legends. All these great cities, they decide to go on an adventure, and I guess the tourists that come here, and I guess if you're from a little farm, I guess Sparta would be like, oh my gosh, so grand. But I guess if you come from a place like Rome and you hear all these legends and you get there, you're probably going to be like really disappointed because it's not as built up, like they said, with all those monuments. So if you're coming from a place like Rome, you might be disappointed, but then also with the experience they give you, maybe not. I don't know. It's interesting though.
Activities. It seems a hostel actually existed that could hold guests that arrived in town for this purpose. Popular attractions probably involved watching the routines of the Agoge. As we mentioned, these had evolved over time to be even more intense than ever. For example, stories told of an ancient Spartan practice known as the whipping, meant to commemorate an occasion where young Spartans had defended a shrine from Thracian barbarians using nothing but reeds. The event, as tradition told, involved the 17-year-old cohorts of the Agoge being given canes and tasked with defending the temple of Apollo against the unarmed 16-year-olds who were challenged to steal the cheeses kept inside.
What?
The infiltrator who stole the most cheese was crowned champion and had their blood drawn for dedication in the temple of Apollo Orthea. In Sparta 2.0 though, the event devolved into a more brutal practice whereby the youths merely stood in the temple and were whipped mercilessly. The last one standing was the champion. No fun and games or cheeses here.
So people volunteer to do this. If I get whipped better than you get whipped, I win. And I guess maybe there was a shortage of fun stuff, and I guess the things people do for glory. But wow, okay, you don't get no cheese. Seems like you're getting ripped off.
The last one standing was the champion. No fun and games or cheeses here. Such a spectacle, though, was likely a huge hit with the tourists, who were left with no choice but to admire the sheer badassery on display.
Okay.
Now this was the Sparta that they had heard about. Not some story of children stealing cheeses, but of young boys being whipped to death's doorstep.
I guess they got a point, right? You're coming there, you want to see how badass Sparta is, and just you show up and you just got like kids playing a game of cheeses. Like you'd be like, man, I was lied to. Like, what is this? But you go there and you see these like manly man getting whipped, and you're like, that's how they do things in Sparta, and that's how they prove themselves. Then outside, like, damn, man, these guys are tough, man. This is Sparta. So I guess you got a point there.
Story of children stealing cheeses, but of young boys being whipped to death's doorstep. Over the centuries, the city leaned further into its new identity with pride. As money and attention flowed in, the old mud brick and stick Sparta got a makeover. New public buildings were constructed, nice. Monuments went up, temples were expanded, and all kinds of upgrades were made to keep the visitors coming. For example, to make the affairs of the Agoge more publicly accessible, an arena was set up outside the Temple of Artemis.
Oh, wow.
Here, spectators could sit in stands richly decorated with statues of Spartan champions while observing youths training and competing for the honor of having themselves be added to the list of champions. Some foreigners were apparently so impressed that they even began sending their own sons to be brought up in the Agoge.
What?
Another popular attraction in Sparta 2.0 were its religious festivals. The three traditional ones
Sparta 2.0. I don't know, that just makes me laugh. Obviously, they didn't call it that, right? They're like, that's just what they're calling it, right? Oh man, I feel like it's like a video game or something. That's like an upgrade.
Another attraction in Sparta 2.0 were its religious festivals. The three traditional ones were the Hyacinthia, the Carnea, and the Gymnopaedia, which together apparently attracted enormous crowds. The Hyacinthia involved a preservation of traditional songs and dances, as well as games on both foot and horse. The Carnea, in this period, is mostly described as a set of games, from which the victor would earn the right to have a statue set up. And finally, the Gymnopaedia was a celebration of Sparta's youth, who would collectively sing praises to Apollo, perform dances, and display their prowess in military and physical exercises. As if this weren't enough, when the second sophistic movement kicked off in the 100s AD and rekindled Greek glorification of the past, Sparta invented a brand new festival. It was called the Leonidaea, meant to celebrate the ancient heroes of Leonidas and Pausanias, who had fought against the Persians. Declamations were given in memory of the dead, and games in which only Spartan citizens could compete were held. The whole thing kicked off with a bang, as it started just as Trajan was ramping up his own campaigns against the Parthians in the east. Imperial propaganda was in full swing here, and the 120,000 sestertii prize pool certainly made sure that everyone was on board with the agenda. Thanks to all of these events, Sparta 2.0 was able to slowly claw its way back up from the pits of irrelevance and maintain a somewhat prominent position economically and politically on the Greek peninsula. However, things did not come without a cost. As we've mentioned, Sparta was forced to become an ever more elaborate parody of its past self to keep people interested. This cost resources. As a result, special taxes had to be enacted.
It's still sad though, man. It's like Sparta. It's not Sparta. It's just a tourist trap. They make them. They want it to look like the Sparta of old, but there's no power there. There's no like excitement of that's what that's what Sparta was, and now it's just like it's just sad. I don't know.
To secure enough funding from the wealthy notables of the city to help balance the budget. Yet still, the heavy crowds drawn by tourism, especially during popular festivals, sometimes broke the bank.
It's like Disneyland, it's like, go visit, this, like, Epcot Center, and this is, Sparta, it kind of, when they go to Greece, let's stop by Sparta, they got this, whatever going on, even though it's not like, you know what I'm saying.
Foot and cart traffic, for instance, wore down roads which had to be regularly maintained by the locals. In addition, population spikes would cause food shortages, which in turn kept prices high. 10 surviving inscriptions from the 2nd century alone show food shortages taking place, as well as 2 additional ones when Hadrian happened to pass nearby. As you can see, this was quite the tricky position for Sparta to be in. Trends seemed to be continuously pushing it to flex harder and harder to maintain its image, which proved increasingly difficult to maintain. And it might also cause some people to ask, to what end was all of this done anyways? Sparta at this time didn't boast a true military force throughout the period, and wasn't waging war on anyone to keep its practical skills honed. The most we hear from it in this regard was when it contributed manpower to the Roman army every now and then. But this was never in the form of some grand deployment of a scarlet-clad unit of hoplite super soldiers ready to kick butt on the battlefield. For example, in 214 AD, when Emperor Caracalla made ready for war against Parthia, he recruited a small 500-man Spartan cohort. Though they are described by Herodian as a phalanx, funerary inscriptions seem to indicate that they were actually deployed as lightly armed troops, and we have no further records of their deeds. As proof of Sparta's military impotence, their militia would be defeated by a group of raiding Visigoths, who went on to sack the city in 396 AD.
Damn.
Sparta would eventually be rebuilt, but only as a smaller, even paler imitation of its past, and was ultimately abandoned completely within a century. Regional power shifted elsewhere, and it wasn't until the 1800s that the modern town of Sparta would be founded atop its remains. This is where Sparta 3.0 is today. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of the rise and fall of Sparta.
Wow.
It was quite incredible for me to learn about how it transformed itself over the years, as I had no idea previously that it existed as an ancient tourist attraction for far longer than it ever did as a military superstar. This fact also proves quite relevant when we learn that much of what we think we know about Sparta 1.0 comes from our records of the later theme park version of Sparta 2.0. This hopefully helps add context to our other videos on topics like the Spartan Mirage, which attempt to shed light on efforts made by modern historians to unearth the true, less caricatured history of Sparta 1.0.
Okay.
A huge thanks to the patrons for funding the channel, and to the researchers, writers, star.
Okay, so basically, that is sad. I mean, I guess like from 750 BC, I mean, it lasted like over 1,000 years. Sparta really lasted like 1,000 years, which obviously in today's age is like freaking long, right? So, it's not like it didn't have a short reign, but like the Sparta, like we all know and love, basically was like 100-year time period, like which isn't long at all. So it kind of feels like just media and like movies and like the 300, they pumped it up bigger than I guess it actually was. I mean, like I can't blame like the shields and the armor. I mean, that's just iconic stuff. So I can definitely see why and everything. And just I guess that short history, at its peak, is pretty awesome. But yeah, it's definitely, it's not as, when you look back and you look at like this, it's not as badass as what I think before I watched this video. I'm not trying, like, I know I'm probably just saying that's probably annoying people right now, but it's just, I still think Sparta's really cool and it's iconic and stuff, but I'm thinking in reality, it's not as, I mean, it's still badass, but it's not as grand, as you say, as what I think. Like, I thought, like, it ruled, like, a lot longer time period. I mean, we got Sparta 2.0, and I that was pretty cool in itself, but like they say, it's almost like a tourist attraction. This is time period right here is what everyone remembers, and it's sad. I mean, they were extremely badass in their time, but kind of, I was hoping for 2.0 to rise up and them turn against the Romans and have another last fight and last hurrah, but I guess it didn't happen. Anyways, now it's basically non-existent, so if you can't really even go visit it because there's not much there. But I think, anyone who like lives in the area, is there any like talk that'd be kind of cool, like just for tourists to come back, just build it up just for tourists anyway, so people come back and have reenactments and stuff like that. I think it'd be really cool. But anyways, guys, let me know your thoughts below in the comments, like you always do. Let me know how much. Kind of cool if you guys went just knowing as much as I did, or you already knew a lot and just kind of wanted to see what I thought about it, or you were just interested like me and just like, oh, cool, let's check this out. But anyways, guys, yeah, hit the like and subscribe. Catch you guys in future videos. Always a blast. You guys have a great weekend. Peace. I'm out of here.